We are now going to learn to use the Compuknit 3 and program in our own patterns. First of all, before programming in your pattern, you must turn the machine on. When you do that, you will hear a beep and you will see the green ready light come on. You need to take your carriage outside the turn signal, and the turn signals are located on either side of your machine. There's one on the left-hand side here, and there's one on the right-hand side over here. I'm going to take the carriage over to the right-hand side and turn my KC button on. The KC button makes this magnet come forward, which will be what will advance our program through the machine. For our first example, we will call up pattern number 422 and use that to knit with. What you do when you're calling up a pattern is you hit the step key, which takes you down to the pattern number position. At this point, you will hit the CE button, which clears out the pattern that's in the machine. You will then input 422, hit the step key, and you now move down to the next position on the needle bed, which tells you that the pattern is being positioned on the orange side, starting with needle number 10, and it will continue over to the green side of the needle bed to green 10. In other words, we have two sides to our machine here. We have a green side that starts from the right hand needle 1 over to right 100. We have an orange side that starts from left 1 over to left 100. Because we are in all over pattern at this point, it also means that our pattern will repeat from these positions. We have called up the pattern in our pattern book that is registered as 422, and this is the one we will be working from. You do have 555 patterns built into the memory of your machine. When I now hit the step key, I am telling the machine that I am happy with where the pattern has been placed on the machine. We will take our carriage across, and we will have selected our pattern needles. At this point, you will thread in your second color, place in your MC button, and continue to knit. You will see the rows advancing each time you go past the carriage. You will also see that the number is flashing. When you do get the flashing light, that means you have selected that row but have not started to knit it yet. Now you see the number change to the solid 17. That means you will be selecting row number 17, and you are actually knitting off row 16. When you hear the beep, that means that you are now programmed to knit the last row of pattern, and you will be programming for the first row of pattern again. Do pay attention to what the flashing lights are doing and not doing so that you understand what's happening with your machine. It is referred to on page 69 in your manual and is very definitely important that you learn what it means. When setting up for tuck work, we can use the same pattern. The only difference would be that instead of having our MC button on, we would take the MC button off and place our two tucking buttons on. At this point, we will also release our second color because we are no longer knitting with this second color. When setting up for thread lace, you must place the KC2 button on instead of KC1. The reason for this is that the needle that comes forward will be knitting your fine yarn, and when knitting the fine yarn, you do not want that needle coming forward, because if it does, you will have poor seaming. We will knit one row across, and our pattern needles have been selected. At this point, we will press in both the MC and the L button to do our thread lace with. Our thread lace thread will go into the B feeder, and now we will take our carriage across and knit thread lace. Again, when you get and hear the beep, that means you have completed your pattern. We will now turn the carriage off and set up to show you how you set up for lace work on the machine. Your lace carriage is what governs your lace work, and we will be using that in conjunction with our knitter. At this point, we will call up one of the lace patterns from the machine book. Pattern number 168 is an example of lace work. We will press the step key, clear the entry, input 168, hit the step key, and step key again to indicate we are ready to knit our lace pattern. We will not program any part of the KC button here because our lace carriage does all the inputting itself. You will notice on your carriage that you have the N and L button here, and that means that that's either normal knitting or it is for lace work. Also, on your lace carriage, you will note that you have the fine knit or the normal lace buttons. We will be using normal lace for this pattern, and so we will stay in the up position. In bringing our lace carriage across the machine, we have selected pattern needles. When we return the carriage, it will transfer the needles in the direction that it was going. We will continue to lace until we see the number 2 or whatever number come up in our second window. When you see the 2 come up in the window, that means it is time for you to actually do 2 rows of knitting. Now we will run our lace carriage again. You'll notice that the 2 disappears, and you now will watch for the next time for a number to appear in your second window. When that number appears, it will tell you whether it's 2 rows of knitting, 4 rows of knitting, or 6 rows of knitting. In this case, it is 2 rows. We have knitted the 2 rows, and again, we will run our lace carriage. Now we see the number 2 appear again, and that means it's time to knit with our knitter. And this is how we accomplish lace on the knitter. We will now set up and show you how to do weaving on the Compuknit 3. First of all, we will call up pattern number 422. When we get the ready light, we will turn our KC1 button on. We will knit 1 row across, selecting our pattern needles. At this point, we will take our thread weaving yarn and place it in front of the carriage. It needs to go in front of the grooves on the side of the presser plate. Every row you will remove the thread and take it to the front side of the carriage. And this is an example of what thread weaving looks like on the knitting machine. At this point, we will go into talking about the variation switches on the machine and how they work. First of all, when we zero in on this part of the machine, we see that we have selector number 1 and selector number 2. Selector number 1 is for all over Fair Isle and will repeat the pattern from one side of your work to the other. Selector number 2 is either for isolation or for doing motif work. You can also use selector number 2 if you want to position a pattern in a particular place. When we use these selectors, you move from one to the other by just pressing the button that you, or the key that you want to use, and that will engage that selector. When you move over on the needle bed here, you will see a green bar and a yellow bar. The green bar will indicate when we are putting pattern in the machine that we want to place it on the green side of the machine, the yellow bar indicating that we want to be on the yellow side. In knitting on your machine, and if you have interrupted a pattern, as we did with the lace pattern, at the top of your garment, and now you are going to make your other piece, you need to hit the start key to get back to row number 1 of the pattern. So by hitting start, you will see the number 1 appear in your window, which indicates that we are now back ready to program number 1 of our pattern. The M key is for memory. This key is used for when we relocate pattern on our sweater, when we are shaping a neckline, or when we have to get back to a specific spot. You have a keyboard that looks just like a little calculator. The step key is our entry key. The CE button is a clear entry, just as a pocket calculator would be. CR corrects a row. We have 2 arrow keys here that will be used for inputting and checking purposes. Then you have a number of variation switches on the machine that allow you to change the patterns that you are working with. Variation switch number 1 allows you to turn the pattern around. In other words, if we were to take the cover of our pattern manual, and if we were to cover up this ram and we wanted to have him go in the opposite direction of what he's going, we would put on variation switch number 1. And instead of him facing in this direction, he would be facing in this direction. Now, if we were to take that variation switch off and put on variation switch number 2, we have made a mirror image of the ram, and that has made 2 rams next to one another facing each other. If it were to repeat in more than one position, you would see the tail of one ram and then a head and then another head and a tail. By taking off that switch and putting on variation switch number 3, we can widen our pattern and make it double wide. On this particular example, I will demonstrate it at the machine. I'm going to call it pattern number 532, which is the pattern set in the machine to do 1x1 ribbing or a number of other things as we choose. So what we will do is hit the step key, clear entry. We will press 532, step, get the ready light, and take our carriage across the machine. Outside the turn first. At this point, with our variation switches on, we received 2 needles coming forward, 2 staying back. If I was to take that variation switch off, you will notice that I will only have 1 needle come forward and 1 needle stay back. This is what has doubled the width of the pattern. Okay? Again, taking and putting the variation switch back on, you will see that 2 needles will come forward each time I pass with the carriage. If I take the variation switch off, you will see only 1 needle come forward. Your variation switches will change immediately upon pressing them. You do not have to go outside the turn signal when you do change them. The only time you need to go outside the turn signal is when you originally set up your pattern. We are now going to use variation switch number 4. Variation switch number 4 will give us double length of a pattern. Go into pattern number 538. And it will give a better example of that. Now when we hear the buzzer, we will put the variation switch number 4 on, and you will see how it will change the pattern completely. There is one other example we can use with this particular program, and that is variation switch number 6. This will change the background color knitting with this color instead of the pink color, and we will be knitting the foreground with this. Another feature of the machine is the number 5 variation switch. The number 5 variation switch turns your pattern upside down. So if you were going to want to do an upside down sweater and we're using your ram as your Fair Isle pattern, in order to have him come in upside down, you would place the number 5 button on, you would start knitting with his feet and move towards his head. The number 7 button is for double jacquard and is used with your ribber. Now we are going to talk about selector number 1 and selector number 2. Selector number 1 allows you to do pattern completely across the needle bed, depending on the number of needles that are in work on the machine. It will carry the pattern from one needle that's in work all the way across to the other needle. It will repeat every 24, 34, or 60 stitches, depending on the pattern that you have chosen to knit with. When you are in selector 2, you are actually doing motif knitting, and you can select up to 6 separate settings in motif knitting. There are the 555 patterns that you can call on for this type of knitting, or you can do your own. I am going to use pattern number 89 for the first demonstration of using selector number 2. To use selector number 2, you press the selector number 2 button. Now I will hit the step key and I will put in pattern number 89. I'm going to clear out the entry, pattern 89, step. When we have hit the step key, we see the number 1 come up in the window. This is asking us how many motifs we want repeated in motif number 1, or how many patterns. I only want a repeat of 1, so I am going to hit the 1. That means that I will get 1 copy of that particular pattern. I will then hit the step key. It has centered the pattern on the machine. I do not want it centered, so I will hit the clear entry key, and I have flashing yellow and green light flashing at me. This means I need to tell the machine if I want it on the orange side or the green side. First of all, I will place it on the orange side, and I will place it on orange 15. So I've hit orange, and now I will hit 15. Now I will hit the step key, and I see the number 2 come up in the window. I have decided not to put a second motif, so I will hit 0, which indicates that I will have only 1 set of motif work. I then hit the step key, and I am at my starting point. I place KC2 on for motif knitting. I knit 1 row across, and my needles have been selected. When you are doing motif knitting, you do need to wrap your stitches. First of all, I will place the MC button on because I will be doing 2-color work. You will notice, because I have used KC2, that I do not have my end needles coming forward. When you are doing motif knitting, the wrapping is done in this way. You always want to do it carriage side, and you will be bringing the second needle from the last pattern needle forward and doing an E-wrap on it, then placing it back into normal position. We will knit 1 row across, and again with our main color yarn, 2 needles out from the last pattern needle. We will slightly bring that forward, do an E-wrap on it, and place it back to B position. We will continue up the entire motif, every row wrapping on cam side. Remember always to place this needle back to B position that you have E-wrapped on, or it will knit your second color. When you have finished with the motif, you turn your KC button off and go on with your knitting. Another sample of doing motif knitting will be calling up the lace carriage pattern. First of all, we will use pattern number 204. In this example, we are going to use 3 different motif settings. First of all, in motif number 1, we are going to call up only 1 pattern. So I'm going to hit 1 to indicate I want a repeat of 1 pattern. Then I will hit the step key, and it has centered it on the machine. I do not want it centered, so I will hit CE to clear that entry out. I have decided to place it on orange 20. Now it's asking me for a second motif. At this point, I have decided to use 2 motifs in my setting, so I will place 2. That means I will get a repeat of 2 of the pattern stitches. I will hit the step key, and it's asking me where do I want to place this on the needle bed. I have decided to place it on green 15. Now it asks me for a third motif, which I do not want. I could continue up to the number 6 if I chose to. I hit 0, step, and now I have the ready light. With the lace carriage, I will now lace. You will notice that you have one set of patterns coming out on the orange side of the machine, and you have two sets of patterns coming out on the green side of the machine. If you decided while you were knitting that you wanted to throw a third lace pattern into the center here halfway up your garment, you have the capabilities of doing that. What you would do is hit your step key. Your pattern number would tell you that you're still with pattern number 204, which is fine. We will hit the step key. Our first motif is going to remain where it is, so we just hit the step key again. It tells us where we placed it. We're not moving it, so we hit the step key again. It tells us we are having 2 pattern repeats in our second motif. That's fine. We hit the step key. It shows us where we have positioned it, and now we are going to hit the step key again, and we're at the third motif. I want to have a repeat here of another lace pattern, so I hit the clear entry key, I hit 1, I hit step, and now it's asking me where am I going to place that on the needle bed. I'm going to place it at orange 5, step. Now we will see the 4 come up. I don't want a 4th pattern, so I hit 0 and then step, and I'm back at the row where I started to make this change. It will not take you back to row 1 of the pattern. Now I run my lace carriage and continue knitting. And that completes our demonstration on using selector number 2. When you are using selector number 1, you do have the option of choosing your first needle position. As I said earlier, selector number 1 does give you motif work completely across the machine. However, in selector number 1, if you do not choose to place it starting as centered on the machine because you want to carry your Fair Isle patterns evenly across the sweater, what you would do is hit your step key, takes you down to your pattern number, you hit the step key, and it tells you that it has centered it on the machine at green or orange 3 in this case. If I want to move that position of my needle over to orange 15, I hit the clear entry key, I place orange 15 into the machine, then I hit step. Now I will see the number of the row that I will be knitting on. It will repeat the pattern completely across the machine, but instead of the pattern beginning on orange 3, it will start over on orange 20. We will now show you how to input your own pattern designs into the 930. With your 930, you received a design tablet to input your patterns on. I have designed a pattern down here for us to use. When you are inputting, you will be inputting the black dots with the black dot here. The white spaces on the pattern will be input here. In this pattern design, I have used 26 stitches. You must count the spaces over and write it down on your pattern so that you have the appropriate number of stitches to assign. Also, you must know how many rows are incorporated in your pattern. In this case, we will be using 7 rows. To go into input, you first of all hit the input key. Your light will come on. At that time, you will also see the pattern number that is being assigned to that pattern. You must write it down on your pattern grid because there's no other way to get back and find out what pattern that is without actually knitting the pattern itself. So as you see, I have written down here pattern 901 as the pattern that I will be using. Now I will hit the step key and I will see the S light up. What it is asking me for is how many stitches I have assigned to my pattern. As I stated, I am using 26 stitches, so I will hit 2, 6, and then step, and that has assigned the stitches to my pattern. Next of all, you will see the green light come up. When that green light comes up, you will also see a figure come into the window. What it's telling you is that you have 436 rows available to program. We do not want to program 436 rows, so we must hit the clear entry key. If you do not hit the clear entry key and hit the step key, you have automatically made this pattern 436 rows long, and you have used up all the memory in your machine. At this point, we will input 7 and then hit step for the number of rows we want. You will then see the number 1 come up in your window, and you will see the R light up. That means that you are on the first row of pattern input. You must use these keys again to input those particular patterns. First of all, according to our grid, we have the first stitch as a black stitch, so we will hit the black key. You will then see that you have moved to needle number 2. That is a white stitch, so we will hit the white button. The next one is a black, so we will hit black. And you will continue across your needle bed or your pattern in this way, hitting black or white depending on what your pattern calls for. You will notice that you only have 10 numbers at this spot. If you use anywhere over 10 stitches, as soon as you hit stitch number 11 and make it either black or white, you will see the grid from 11 to 20. And you will continue then across your board, making the black dots black and the white dots white. Once you have made the last dot black, even if you have 20 more stitches and there are no more black stitches, you may move up to the next row. The next row is you get to by hitting the up arrow key, and we are now on row 2. You will see row 2 come up in the window. You also see the green light indicating that's where we are. On row 2 of our pattern, we have no black dots, so that it is not necessary to enter anything on that row. We will move up to row 3, which has our next row that has dots on it. On row 3, we have the third needle programmed as a black dot, so we must move over until we see the 3 in the window. You also see the S light up, indicating that you are on a stitch on a particular row. Now we will make that one black. We will move over and make the appropriate keys black as we go across. If at any time you are confused with your pattern as to where you are on which row, you can always hit the row key. It will tell you you're on row 3, and then you hit the S key and you are back at stitch number 9 and can continue on with your inputting. You must input all of your pattern at one time. To go into the check mode and do any inputting is very long and tedious. It is much better to do it while you are inputting. Once you have inputted your complete pattern, then you hit the input key and go out of input. You will see the ready light come on, and if you were ready to knit your pattern at this time, you will notice by hitting the step key that you already have pattern number 901 in there ready to be knit from. So you would get back up to the ready light and go on with your knitting. Before knitting your pattern, however, you should check it to make sure that you have entered it correctly. To check a pattern, you go into the check mode. First of all, it will tell you what pattern number you have used. So if you have forgotten to assign or write down that pattern number, you still have this time to write that pattern number down. Then you hit the step key. It will tell you how many stitches you have assigned to that pattern. Again, you hit the step key, and it will tell you how many rows you assigned to the pattern. If you made a mistake in entering your program and should have used 8 rows instead of 7 rows, you will have to start over. You cannot make that change. However, once we get into the grid that we formed, we can make any changes we want. We hit the step key, and we are on row 1. You will see the lights light up, indicating which lights you have, or which needles you have made black. The 1 would be a black stitch, 3 would be a black stitch, 5. Those are the needles that are going to come forward for pattern work. 2, 4, and 6 are white spaces. If you found that needle number 5 should have been a white space instead of a black space, you want to use the side arrow key and moving across over until you see 5 come up in your window. You will, at that point, hit the white key. You will see that white, or 5, is no longer white, or black has become white. and you can continue across the needle bed or board in case there are other mistakes. If there are no more mistakes, you can move up to the next row to check the next row. Another way to check your pattern is to use the buzzer. On the back of your needle bed, you have a dial that controls the volume of the buzzer, and it can be high or low. At this point, I will hit this key, and what you will hear as it goes across is a solid beep for the white spaces, and when you see the black spaces or the lighted up lights, you will hear a double beep. When it reaches the end of the row, it will stop. If you were listening, you did hear the change in the pitch of the beep as it went across. If you wanted to repeat that row because you realized there was a mistake, you can repeat the row, or you can move up and check the next row. It is quite often much easier to check with the buzzer following your card or program than it is to visually check it. Once you are done checking your program, you can hit the check key and go out of the check mode. Another feature that you have in this mode is to actually do some memo work and put in memo windows into your pattern. To go into memo, you hit the memo key. Now we are in pattern number 901, and I want to tell myself that on row 2 I want to have a second color. So I hit the up arrow key until I see the 2 in this window. When I see the 2, I will hit color number 2, and you will see it appear in the second window. Now when I am knitting, every time I hit that row, it will tell me that I want color number 2 in my feeder and not color number 1. Likewise, you would have 2 passes of your carriage with that color, so you would on row 3 make color 2. Once you are through making all the memo information, you hit the memo key and take it off. Now when I take my carriage across the machine, I have my KC setting on. I have needles in working position. And if you are watching the window, you will see on row 1 there is nothing indicated here. On row 2, that 2 that I assigned as my second color shows up. When I go across, row 3 also shows up that color, and 4 does not. So it is a reminder to you that you are to change colors. Another feature of the memo window is to signify whether you are using fine lace or normal lace. In using that memo variation, you still go back into the memo key. I can go up to row 2 and I can cancel out that 2 at any time. Okay? Now I'm going to do lace work instead of 2 color work. The orange bar here and the green bar signify and work with your lace carriage as to the direction of type of lace you will be knitting. On your lace carriage, you have an N and an F setting for normal lace and for fine lace. I put the N on for normal lace, and I would hit the orange bar. If I wanted it to be fine lace, which is at the bottom position, I will hit the green bar, and the dot or the circle is at the bottom of that window. Now when you are running your lace carriage across the machine, you will see that this signal will change for you. Notice that when we hit row 2, it said to change our lever to normal lace. When I come back, it tells me to change it to fine lace. Normal lace and fine lace. So you can sit and make any memo keys in your input programs that you want to signify to you what you are actually doing at that time. You can also use the memo key in the built-in patterns in your machine, any of the 555 patterns. However, they will not save for you. In other words, if I go into pattern number 538, first of all, I have to put the memo key on, then you move up to row 10. You will hit the number 2, and now you have told yourself that on row number 10 of the built-in pattern, I want to change my color. You take the memo key off and you go ahead with your knitting of your garment. At the time you and it will save that pattern until you actually go in and change your pattern number here again. Once I have gone from 538 to a new pattern, I will no longer have the information that I saved. Whereas when you're doing your own inputting, it will always stay there unless you actually physically change it yourself. You do not know when you first start inputting into your machine how many patterns you will be able to get into the memory before you will be out of space. It all depends on the number of stitches you use in each pattern and the number of rows. If you decide that you need to cancel out a pattern because you go into input and you get a blank window, then you need to use the C key to clear out an existing pattern that you have already input. You may not clear out any of the patterns that are built into the memory of the machine. In order to clear out a pattern, you go into the input mode, and in the input mode, first of all, the next pattern number available will be assigned to you. We will hit the clear entry key, and now we will place in 901, and we will hit the C key, and that means that we are clearing out that pattern and it no longer exists. You do not have the option to call that pattern back now, so always make sure that when you clear out a pattern that that's what you want to do. Now when I take input off and go back into input, you will notice that the 901 appears for me again. That means I am ready to input that particular number again. Just as a quick review on doing inputting, we are going to hit the input key. We have 901, we have stitches, we assign the number of stitches, and then we assign the number of rows by clear entry and 14. Then you make any black dots you need, white dots, and so forth. That is how we do our inputting at the machine. Now I will set up and show you how to relocate a pattern when you divide for a neckline. First of all, I will call up a Fair Isle pattern, pattern number 538. I will place my KC1 button on, knit one row across, place my MC button on, and thread my second color into the B feeder. When it is time for me to divide for my neckline, I do want to make sure that I keep my carriage going in the direction of my work and not bring it back. With it still going to the right, I place my M key on. You will see that your light is still flashing in the window. It must not have gone solid to you. At this point, I place half of my work into hold position. I place my hold button on and go on with knitting one half of my neckline. When I have finished that side of my neckline, I release my KC button, and I at that point go ahead and remove my shoulder stitches on scrap and ravel cord. Once you have removed that side of your work, you need to take your carriage back to the side opposite where you need to start from. At this point, you take and put your stitches back into their latches. You must make sure all stitches are back in the B position. At this point, we will put on our leading part button. We will put KC1 back on and make sure that we are outside the turn signal. We will also hit our M key, which will return us back to the row where we started our neckline shaping. With the part button on, we make one pass across the carriage or across the machine, reload our colors in the same way they were knitting before, place our MC button back on, and continue knitting the other side of our neckline. You also need to readjust your row counter back to where you started your neckline shaping. When you have finished this side of your neckline, you will again remove it on scrap and ravel cord. We will now show you how to rip up in a pattern if you have a problem in your knitting. First of all, you need to look to see what is happening on the window to make sure that whether the light is flashing or whether it is solid. My light is still flashing, which indicates that I have not advanced the program. If I rip up one row, first of all you have to put your needles back to stockinette position, and you will rip up one color at a time. Now I will hit CR for correct row. I will hit 1 because I have ripped up one row, and I will hit CR for correct row. Then I will place my leading part button on to get to the other side with a free pass. You will then return the colors to the appropriate slots, A and B. You will reprogram your MC button, and you can continue on with your knitting. That is how you accomplish any time you are ripping up an odd number of rows, 1, 3, or 5. If you have to rip up an even number of rows, it is done a little differently. First of all, you need to push your needles back again and rip up those 2 rows. You also should unthread the yarn from your feeder and take the slack out of it to get it out of your way. At this point, I will put both part buttons on because I will be making 2 passes of my carriage. I will freeze my card so that it will not move. To freeze your card, you place the CR button on and it leaves the card in the position that it's in, or the program. I push back any needles that were selected into pattern work, and at this point I hit the CE button to return my pattern to where it was. I hit CR to CR, and it will return to the proper place where I want it. Again, I still have my part buttons on. I make my free pass, come across. I have gone back the 2 rows that I needed to, and I again rethread my machine, put in my MC button, and continue on with my knitting. Hi, we will now show you how to use the single bed color changer with your Compuknit 3. First of all, we must change over to the sinker plate that goes to the color changer. At this point, we will thread our thread into the color changer, or the sinker plate. We will carry the thread over to our color changer and thread it into the feeder for the color changer. Make sure that the thread goes up and under the wire and that it has a free flow. We will program in pattern number 390 for this demonstration. I will place my KC1 button on and knit 1 row across. At this point, I will press in both of my part buttons. My window indicates that I will be knitting with color number 1. So I stay with color number 1. I will knit back, and then coming across you will see that the 1 will change to 2. At this point I will go over past my color changer and change the button to color number 2. Always make sure that the color did change for you. When I go back, I see that my color changes to 1, so I will change to color number 1. You will notice now that I have changed to color number 3 in the window. That means I will be picking up the 3rd color. I am now using color number 1. All right, now I will show you how to do tuck work with your color changer. For this example, we will program in pattern number 304. Again, outside the turn signal, we put on KC1. We come across our needle bed, and instead of our part buttons, we will place our tuck buttons on. I am knitting with color number 1. I knit 2 rows and it tells me to change to color number 2. Now it tells me to change to color number 3. And now color number 4. And then you are back at color number 1. Color number 2, color number 3, and color number 4. Then you will be back to color number 1. Here we have our 3-color work, and up here we have the multicolored tuck work. And that completes our demonstration on the single bed color changer.